It was just after sunrise in Napa Valley, the air still cool and quiet, with only the soft crunch of sneakers on gravel breaking the morning stillness. Locals often say it's the best time of day, before the tourists arrive, before the vineyards wake up. And that's when 32-year-old Emily Sanders, a beloved high school art teacher, laced up her running shoes and headed out for her daily jog along the familiar wooded trail near her cottage. Emily had made the same run almost every morning for the last 3 years. Everyone in the area knew her, the friendly woman with the ponytail and bright smile, always jogging with a podcast in her ears, waving to passing dog walkers. But that morning, something fell off. Hours passed and Emily never returned. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her water bottle was found sitting untouched on the bench near the trailhead. By noon, her friends had started calling around. By evening, a missing persons report had been filed. Search parties were organized, helicopters flew overhead, and volunteers combed through the woods, shouting her name into the trees. But Emily was gone, just vanished, like a wisp of morning fog. No signs of a struggle, no leads, no suspects. Days turned into weeks, then months. And slowly, her story faded into the background, buried beneath other headlines and forgotten by all but those who loved her. 2 years later, deep in the same forest where Emily disappeared, a local truffle hunter named Frank was out early with his pig, Daisy. Frank had lived in Napa his whole life and spent his mornings searching for rare mushrooms, selling them to fancy restaurants and tourists with too much money. That morning felt like any other. But Daisy, unusually restless, kept pulling toward a dense thicket just off the main path. Frank followed, calling her name, but Daisy wouldn't stop. She scratched at the dirt near a fallen tree, snorting and digging furiously. At first, Frank thought maybe she'd found an especially large truffle. But what he saw beneath the surface made his blood run cold. Not far away, just as this eerie discovery was beginning to unfold, across town, a high school senior named Marcus Johnson sat quietly on a crowded city bus. He was tall, quiet, and always kept to himself, more interested in his sketchbook than small talk. That day, he had taken a different route home after staying late for college prep tutoring. The bus jerked slightly as an older pregnant woman climbed on, looking around for a place to sit. Without hesitation, Marcus stood up and offered her a seat, giving her a small nod before returning to the back of the bus. The woman smiled, clearly tired, and sat down with a grateful sigh. But as she settled in, she reached into her purse, pulled out a folded note, and handed it back to Marcus, almost as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. Inside that note was something that would change everything for Marcus. Something no one could have seen coming. And strangely enough, it would soon connect him to a story he didn't even know existed. A story about a woman who vanished on a morning jog, and the shocking thing a pig unearthed 2 years later in the quiet woods of Napa. What was written in that note? And what did Daisy the pig really dig up that day? Stay with us. The answers are coming. Frank stared down at the shallow patch of earth Daisy had been digging. At first, it looked like a torn piece of cloth, dirty and tangled in roots. But when he reached down and pulled gently, his hand froze. It was more than just cloth. It was part of something much bigger, something that had clearly been buried for a long time. He stepped back, suddenly short of breath. The silence around him felt heavy, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath. Daisy circled the spot, still snorting and pawing at the dirt, but Frank gently pulled her back. He grabbed his phone with trembling hands and called the local sheriff. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't even know what he'd just found. But deep in his gut, he knew this wasn't something to ignore. Something was wrong. Something about this place that felt like a grave. Back in town, Marcus sat quietly at the back of the bus, staring at the folded note in his hands. He hadn't opened it yet. Something about the way the woman had handed it to him felt strange, not in a bad way, just unusual. She hadn't said much, just smiled softly and told him to read it when he was alone. It was written on thick paper, like something you'd see in a wedding invitation, and tied with a small ribbon. Who even carried paper like this anymore? As the bus rolled through the city streets, Marcus kept looking at it, debating whether to wait until he got home. But something inside him was too curious. He gently untied the ribbon and unfolded the note. The handwriting was neat and elegant, written in blue ink that seemed to dance across the page. The first line made his heart skip a beat. "I believe you're the young man I've been looking for." He blinked, rereading it. What was she talking about? The note continued. "You don't know me, but I've been searching for someone kind. Someone who would do the right thing, without asking for anything in return. Today you did that. And that means I can finally give you this. There was no signature. No explanation. Just a smaller folded piece of paper tucked inside with an address written on it. No name. Just a street and a house number somewhere out in Napa. Marcus stared out the window, his mind racing. Why would a stranger write something like this? And how did she know he'd even give up his seat? Was this some kind of setup? A test? He didn't know. But something about the way she looked at him, it didn't feel like a prank. It felt real. Like a moment meant to happen. Across town, news about Frank's discovery spread quickly. Within hours, the sheriff's department had cordoned off the area. Crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, and investigators moved quietly through the trees. Journalists gathered at the trailhead, asking if this could finally be the break in Emily Sanders' missing persons case. The forest, once so peaceful, now held an air of quiet dread. Sheriff Donna Perez, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the job, stood near the excavation site. She'd been there the day Emily disappeared. She remembered her well, how the whole community had rallied around her family, how they'd searched for weeks with no answers. It had haunted her every day since. As investigators dug deeper, they recovered what appeared to be remains, bones, clothing fragments, and something else. A small, rusted locket with initials engraved on it. Yes, Sheriff Perez closed her eyes. It wasn't confirmation, not yet. They'd need DNA testing. But her gut told her what everyone else was already whispering. Meanwhile, Marcus sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the note again. He'd Googled the address. It was real, an old house tucked away near the edge of the woods outside Napa. The place looked abandoned. Overgrown weeds, peeling paint. Nothing about it said welcome. And yet, something kept pulling at him, like a thread he had to follow. He didn't tell his mom. She worked double shifts and worried enough already. Instead, he told her he had a field trip with his college prep group and left early the next morning, backpack slung over his shoulder, note tucked safely inside. As Marcus rode the bus out of the city and into the rolling hills of Napa, he watched the landscape change. The buildings thinned out, replaced by vineyards and tall trees. The air felt different. Cleaner. Quieter. But the closer he got to the address, the more his stomach turned. What was he walking into? The bus dropped him off at a dusty corner stop. From there, it was a 20-minute walk along a cracked, winding road. Birds chirped in the trees overhead, and the sound of distant water drifted through the air. Finally, he saw it, the house from the photo. It was even more run down in person, like a forgotten relic from another time. He hesitated at the gate, heart pounding. Then he took a deep breath and stepped through. The front door creaked open before he even knocked. Standing there was a man in his 60s, thin with graying hair and tired eyes. He looked surprised to see Marcus, but not confused, as if he'd been expecting someone, just not him. "You must be Marcus," the man said, his voice hoarse. Marcus nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "She told me someone would come." Marcus held up the note. "The woman on the bus, she gave me this. Told me to come here." The man studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside and motioned him in. The house smelled like old wood and dust, but it wasn't dirty. Just quiet. Lived in. Every surface seemed to hold a memory. Framed photos, books stacked neatly, an old clock ticking steadily. The man led him to a small study at the back of the house. There, he opened a drawer and pulled out a thin, faded folder. "She said when the right person came along, I'd know. And I think maybe you're it." He handed Marcus the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, old photographs, handwritten notes. All of them about Emily Sanders, the woman who vanished during her jog 2 years ago. Marcus looked up, confused. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because she wasn't just some missing person," the man said softly. "She was my niece. And she didn't just disappear. Someone took her. And I think the person who did it knew this house. Knew these woods." Marcus felt a chill down his spine. "But what does this have to do with me?" he asked. The man hesitated. "That's the part one don't fully understand. But the woman who gave you that note, she's not who you think she is. And she's not just some stranger on a bus." He paused, lowering his voice. "She's been watching this case for years. Gathering pieces. Trying to put it all together. And if she gave you the address, then you're part of it now." Marcus sat back, trying to make sense of it all. A stranger gives him a note. Leads him to an old man tied to a missing woman. And now he's being told this is all connected? None of it made sense. But at the same time, something inside him knew he couldn't walk away. Back in the forest, investigators were beginning to uncover more. Not just remains, but objects. A shoe, half buried. A torn piece of a runner's armband. And buried deeper still, a small, rusted tin box filled with old photographs and letters. Letters addressed to someone named C. Sheriff Perez read through them carefully, her eyes narrowing. The letters hinted at a complicated relationship, possibly romantic, but tense. There was talk of secrets, of running away, of being watched. Whoever C was, he wasn't just someone from Emily's past. He might have been the last person to see her alive. But who was he? And why had these letters been buried near her final resting place? Back at the old house, Marcus and the man, whose name he now knew was Henry, sat in silence. Henry poured 2 glasses of iced tea, then spoke again. "There's more. Something you should see." He opened another drawer and pulled out an old camera, the kind that used film. Inside, still intact, was a roll that had never been developed. "Emily used to jog with us sometimes," he said. "Said she liked to take pictures of the sunrise." This was found weeks after she vanished, in a pawn shop 2 towns over. "I've been meaning to get the film developed, but something kept stopping me." He handed the camera to Marcus. "Maybe it's time." Marcus took it, staring at the scratched metal and faded strap. He didn't know what was on that film, but something told him it might hold a clue, maybe even the last thing Emily ever saw. And far from there, in a quiet house tucked at the edge of a vineyard, the woman from the bus stood at her window, watching the clouds shift in the sky. She held a phone in one hand, a file in the other. Her eyes were sharp, focused. The game had begun. And the next move was Marcus's. The ride back into town was quiet. Marcus sat near the window, clutching the old camera tightly in his lap. The bus rumbled along winding roads lined with grapevines and shadowy trees, but all he could think about was what might be on that film roll. He had it developed at a small print shop in downtown Napa, one of the few places left that still dealt with film. The old man behind the counter didn't ask questions, just told Marcus to come back in an hour. While he waited, Marcus walked slowly through the town square, the note still folded in his pocket, like a secret too heavy to forget. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his mom, just checking in. He typed back that everything was fine, then put the phone away. In truth, nothing felt fine. The more he learned, the deeper this whole mystery seemed to go. A missing woman. A buried box of letters. A camera that could hold the final piece of her story. And somehow, for reasons he still couldn't understand, a stranger believed he was the one meant to find it all. An hour later, he returned to the shop. The clerk handed him a small envelope of developed photos. Marcus paid and stepped outside before carefully sliding the photos out. The first few were simple: trees, the early morning sun breaking through fog, a vineyard bathed in golden light. They looked peaceful, even ordinary. But then, something changed. The 6th photo showed a shadow. Not the kind made by trees or rocks, but something human-shaped, standing just off the trail. The next one was blurrier, like the camera had been shaking. There was motion in the frame. A foot, a hand. Something, or someone, was clearly near Emily. Close. Too close. And the final photo was nearly black, except for a faint flash of light, like the sun reflecting off something metal. Marcus's heart raced. He didn't know what he was looking at, not completely, but his instincts told him these weren't just sunrise pictures. Emily had seen something, or someone, and tried to capture it. Maybe even in her final moments. He took the photos straight to Sheriff Perez's office. She looked over them slowly, her brow furrowed deep in concentration. Then she leaned back in her chair and let out a heavy breath. "These weren't in the original case file," she said. "Which means the camera really did go missing. We assumed it was taken. Maybe by the same person who took Emily. But why would it show up in a pawn shop?" Marcus asked. Maybe the person who had it panicked. Or maybe they didn't know what was on the roll. She paused. "But the shadows in these images, they tell me Emily might have known she was being followed." Marcus swallowed hard. "Do you think whoever took her is still out there?" Perez didn't answer right away. She looked at the photos again, then at Marcus. "I think we're dealing with someone who's been hiding in plain sight." Back at the old house, Henry was going through more of Emily's journals. Her handwriting filled the pages, calm and thoughtful, but beneath it there was a quiet fear. She had written about strange cars following her home from school. Phone calls with no one on the other end. Once, she even mentioned finding her front door unlocked when she was sure she had locked it that morning. One entry stood out, dated just 2 weeks before she vanished. I don't know who he is, but he's watching me again. I saw him parked down the trail near the bench. He always wears the same blue windbreaker. And today I saw him talking to a kid near the market. A teenager, maybe? That's the first time I've seen him with anyone. Henry stared at the words, a chill creeping over him. Who was the man in the windbreaker? And why was he near a high school student? He called Sheriff Perez immediately. After she read the entry, she made another call to a woman named Denise who worked in the records department. They needed to pull surveillance from near the market 2 years ago. Most of it had probably been deleted, but maybe, just maybe, there'd be something. While they waited, Marcus returned to school, trying to go back to normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. During class, he'd catch himself staring out the window, wondering who else was watching. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following him now. At the bus stop, he noticed the same silver sedan passing by twice in one afternoon. The driver wore sunglasses. Never looked his way. But it was enough to make Marcus feel like the roles had started to flip. At night, he'd wake up suddenly, sure he heard something outside. Once he even found his bedroom window cracked open just slightly. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe he'd left it like that. But in the back of his mind, a seed of doubt was growing. Meanwhile, back at the sheriff's office, Denise found something. A single camera from a grocery store parking lot 2 years ago. The footage was grainy, but it showed Emily buying apples and water. And standing across the street, a man in a blue windbreaker, face turned away from the camera. At one point, he spoke to a teenager who passed by, handed him something. Perez paused the footage. Can we get a clearer view of the kid's face? Denise zoomed in, enhanced the image as much as she could. It was Marcus. Or, at least, someone who looked very much like him. Same height, same build, same hoodie he used to wear back then. Perez's pulse quickened. She needed answers. Fast. She called Marcus in again. At first, he denied remembering anything. He didn't recall talking to anyone near the market, especially not someone in a windbreaker. But then something flickered in his mind. A vague memory. A man had stopped him once, asked if he liked photography. Offered him a cheap camera for $20. Marcus had said no and walked off. I thought he was just some random guy, Marcus said. Why would that matter now? Perez looked him in the eyes. Because if this was the same man Emily mentioned in her journal, he may have used you to distract her. Or worse. Marcus felt sick. Wait, he said. You don't think I? No, Perez interrupted. But I think you were closer to this case than you ever realized. And maybe that's why the woman on the bus gave you the note.
She's trying to show you something.
Or protect you from someone. Marcus left the station, more confused than ever. He walked home slowly, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. When he reached his front door, a white envelope was waiting on the ground. No name. No return address. Inside was a single photo. It was him, standing in front of Henry's house, camera in hand. The picture had been taken from a distance, like someone had been watching him from the trees. On the back, one line was scrawled in red ink. You're looking in the wrong direction. Marcus sat down on the porch steps, his hands trembling. Someone was warning him. Or threatening him. Maybe both. He called Henry, who insisted he come back immediately. When Marcus arrived, Henry showed him something he'd been keeping secret. A journal of his own, notes, timelines, theories he'd built up over the last 2 years. There was one name that appeared over and over, Caleb Wright. A former student of Emily's. Quiet, smart, often kept to himself. He had a history of obsession. He'd once been suspended for following a teacher home. No charges were ever filed, but the incident had been noted. And right before Emily vanished, Caleb had dropped out of school without explanation. They tried to look him up now, but there were no recent addresses. No job listings. Like he'd disappeared too. As the night wore on, Henry and Marcus pieced together a rough timeline. Caleb had been in Emily's class. He'd stayed late often, sometimes waiting by her car. The last person Emily mentioned seeing in the woods before she vanished matched his description. And then there was the man in the blue windbreaker. Could it have been Caleb in disguise? Or someone connected to him? One final clue remained. The letters buried in the tin box, addressed to C. Sheriff Perez had just gotten a handwriting analysis back. The writing didn't match Emily's. It matched someone else. Someone who hadn't been on their radar. Someone still living in the Napa area. The case was unraveling in ways no one expected. Every answer led to another question. Every clue deepened the mystery. And Marcus? He was no longer just a witness. He was now at the center of it all. Marcus hadn't slept in 2 nights. His mind wouldn't stop racing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that photo. The one taken of him outside Henry's house. The red writing on the back haunted him. You're looking in the wrong direction. It wasn't just a warning. It was a clue. But what did it mean?
Who was he supposed to be watching instead?
He kept the lights off in his room that night, sitting near the window with the curtains slightly open. Every few minutes, he scanned the street. There was no sign of the silver sedan, but he knew better than to think he was safe. Someone was out there. Someone who knew where he lived.
Who he was.
And they were watching his every move. Meanwhile, Sheriff Perez was digging deeper into the letters found near Emily's remains. She'd sent copies to a retired FBI profiler who owed her a favor. The results came back fast and disturbing. The tone of the letters had changed midway through. The early ones were tender, romantic. But the later ones became colder, more controlling, possessive. Whoever wrote them had felt betrayed. Like Emily had promised something and then backed away. The profiler believed the writer wasn't just emotionally unstable, he was likely obsessive and dangerous. That same day, Denise from the records department called with a breakthrough. She'd tracked down employment history tied to Caleb Wright. After disappearing from school, he'd worked under an alias, Cal Wright, as a part-time handyman for several vineyards in the area. One of them sat just a mile from the very trail where Emily had gone missing. It was the same stretch of land where Frank's pig, Daisy, had made the discovery. But there was more. Caleb had rented a small cabin on the edge of that vineyard. Remote. Off-grid. No utilities listed under his name. Perez immediately dispatched deputies to check it out, but when they arrived, the place had already been burned to the ground. The structure was still smoking. Inside the ashes, they found a partially melted cell phone and a scorched notebook, pages too damaged to read. Perez stood in the rubble, jaw clenched. Someone was covering their tracks. And fast. Across town, Marcus sat with Henry again, the camera and photos spread out on the table. Henry looked more tired than usual, his eyes sunken, voice hoarse. There's something I didn't tell you, he said slowly. Back when Emily first vanished, I got a phone call. No caller ID. The voice on the other end was whispering, like they were afraid someone might hear. All they said was, you shouldn't have let her run alone. Then they hung up. Marcus stared at him. Why didn't you tell anyone? Henry hesitated. Because part of me thought, maybe it was true. I knew she was scared. She told me someone was watching her. And I didn't do enough. Just then Marcus's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You want answers?
Come alone.
10 p.m. Oak Ridge Trailhead. Bring the photos. No cops. Attached was a live image of the outside of his house, taken just minutes ago. Marcus's hands went cold. He showed the message to Henry, who immediately reached for the landline, but Marcus grabbed his arm.
No.
If we tell the sheriff, they'll vanish again. This might be the only chance to end this. Henry hesitated. Then I'm coming with you. No, Marcus said firmly. They said alone.
I need to know why they're targeting me.
Why me? The trailhead was pitch dark when Marcus arrived. He carried a small flashlight, the camera photos tucked inside his jacket. The trees loomed tall and silent. Every sound, the crunch of leaves, the rustle of branches, put him on edge. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting someone to jump out. But no one came. He walked deeper into the trail, following the dirt path, lit only by his flashlight beam. After about 10 minutes, he saw it, something glinting in the dark. A small lantern, sitting on a wooden bench. Beside it, a woman. She stood slowly as he approached. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. It was the woman from the bus. You came, she said softly. Marcus stared at her. Who are you? She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I'll tell you everything. But first give me the photos. Marcus hesitated.
Why?
What's on them? She glanced around, voice low.
Proof.
Of who really did it. Of who's still hiding. Marcus stepped closer, but didn't hand them over yet. Why me? Why did you give me that note? Her eyes filled with something between sadness and urgency. Because you were there once. You were part of the story, even if you didn't know it. The man Emily feared? He used people to get close. He used you. And now he's watching again. Marcus took a breath, heart pounding. Who is he? But before she could answer, a sharp crack rang out through the woods, a branch snapping. They both turned. A flashlight beam blinked in the distance. Then another. The woman's eyes widened. He's here. She grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled him off the trail, down a narrow embankment into the brush. They crouched behind a fallen tree, barely breathing. Above them, footsteps crunched slowly along the trail. Then a voice called out, calm, steady, male. Marcus. It was too dark to see his face, but the voice was familiar. Don't be scared, it continued. You're so close now. You deserve to know everything. Just come out. Marcus froze. That voice, it wasn't Caleb's. It was someone he knew. Someone who had been around this whole time. The woman beside him whispered, whatever you do, don't speak. He doesn't know I'm with you. He thinks he's controlling the story. But he's not. The man kept walking, the light swinging across the trail, inches from where they hid. Then silence. He stopped. I know you're here, the voice said. You're looking in the wrong direction. Marcus's blood ran cold. He stayed perfectly still, waiting, listening. A few moments later, the footsteps faded. They were gone. The woman reached into her coat and handed Marcus a small object. A USB drive. Everything you need is on this, she said. The photos. The records. The real identity of the man who took Emily. It's not just about her anymore. He's done this before. More than once. And he won't stop. Marcus stared at her. Who are you really? She gave a faint smile. I'm someone who survived him. Then she stood and disappeared into the trees, her lantern light swallowed by the dark. Marcus was left standing in the silence, heart racing, clutching the drive and the camera photos. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Marcus didn't go home that night. He couldn't. Not with that voice still ringing in his ears. You're looking in the wrong direction. And now this woman, who seemed to know everything, had vanished again, leaving him with nothing but a USB drive and more questions than ever. He walked until his legs gave out, then sat under a tree, still clutching the drive like it was his last lifeline. He stared into the dark woods, trying to piece it all together. Someone he knew had called out to him. Someone close. Someone he'd never suspected. By sunrise, he made his way back to Henry's house. Henry was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee in hand, like he hadn't slept either. Marcus dropped the USB drive on the table. She gave me this. She said it has everything. Henry picked it up gently, eyes narrowing. Did she tell you who it is?
No.
But I heard him last night. He called my name. Henry looked up, a shadow passing over his face. Did you recognize the voice? I think so, Marcus said quietly. But I'm afraid to say it out loud. Because if I'm right, it changes everything. Henry slid the drive into his laptop. It took a few minutes to load. Inside were folders, photos, documents, audio recordings, and a file labeled Do Not Ignore. Marcus clicked it open. A video popped up. Grainy surveillance footage. It showed Emily standing near her car at a gas station. She looked tense, checking her surroundings. Then, a man approached her. The quality was low, but Marcus felt his chest tighten. The man was Sheriff Donna Perez. Marcus froze. Henry leaned in, squinting. That can't be, but the badge was clear, the posture familiar. The video showed Perez leaning in close, saying something to Emily. Emily backed away, clearly uncomfortable. Then the video cut off. Marcus's mind reeled. That doesn't make sense. Perez has been helping us. Henry was silent for a long moment. Unless she's been helping steer the investigation away from herself. They kept digging through the files. Another folder held screenshots of emails, conversations between Perez and someone under the username Searite87. The messages were filled with references to clearing up loose ends and keeping the story quiet. One message said, I handled the trailhead. You handle the girl. It was like the floor dropped out from under Marcus. He remembered how Perez always seemed to have answers, how she dismissed early leads, how she brushed off the camera being found in the pawn shop. Had she known it was missing because she took it? Was she working with Caleb? Or was she the one behind it all? That's when the second twist came crashing down. In the final folder was a photo, time-stamped just a few days before Emily vanished. It showed her standing in front of a cabin, that cabin, the one that had burned down. But she wasn't alone. She was with someone. Marcus leaned closer, his pulse hammering. It wasn't Caleb. It was Henry. The image was clear. His face unmistakable. Standing just a few feet from Emily, smiling like he didn't have a care in the world. Marcus stepped back. What is this? Henry looked stunned. I don't remember this. This has to be fake. I never. Marcus's voice rose. But you said you didn't see her that week. You said she only called. Henry's eyes filled with panic. I swear, Marcus, I didn't lie. I didn't. The laptop beeped again. Another file opened. A recording this time. Emily's voice, calm but shaky. If anything happens to me, and if you're hearing this, it means I was right. I don't know who I can trust anymore. Even Henry has been acting strange lately. I found one of my journals in his truck. I never gave it to him. The recording ended in static. Marcus stepped back, his entire body buzzing with dread. The man who had helped him, guided him, shared coffee and memories. He'd been part of the circle the entire time. Maybe not the killer, but hiding something. Henry stood, reaching for Marcus.
Please.
I didn't hurt her. I loved her. She was my niece. But Marcus was already backing toward the door. You said you never saw her that week. That you were too late to help. But you were with her. At that cabin. You knew where it was. Henry's voice cracked. I went to bring her home. She wanted to disappear. She was afraid of someone, she didn't say who. She thought the only way to be safe was to vanish. But I never. Then why didn't you tell the police? Marcus shouted. Henry fell silent. And in that silence, the truth grew louder than anything else. Marcus didn't run. Not yet. He just left. Quietly. He walked down the road, his thoughts spinning. He didn't know who to believe anymore. Sheriff Perez might be dirty. Henry might be lying. And the woman from the bus. How did she know all of this? Why did she choose him? Back in town, the news was changing fast. Reporters were at the scene of the burned-down cabin, calling it a possible breakthrough in the Emily Sanders case. Sheriff Perez gave a brief statement to the press, insisting they were following all leads and getting closer to the truth. But her face didn't look like someone chasing justice. It looked like someone on the edge. Later that evening, Marcus returned home. He went straight to his room, locked the door, and opened the files again. There was one final audio clip he hadn't played. It was labeled Trailhead Recording, Cleaned Up Audio. He hit play. First silence. Then footsteps. Then Emily's voice. She was breathing heavily, walking fast. A man's voice called out, calm, soft. Emily, please. Just stop. I told you I'd fix this. She turned, clearly panicked. You lied to me. You said you'd keep me safe. I did. But you went to the sheriff. You made this harder. A long pause. I didn't want it to end like this. Then a scream. Then silence. Marcus stared at the screen, unable to move. He knew that voice. It was neither Henry nor Caleb. It was someone else. Someone he had trusted even more. And suddenly, he realized he'd been looking in the wrong direction too. Marcus sat frozen in front of the laptop, the audio still echoing in his head. He had listened to the clip 3 times, and each time, the voice became more unmistakable. It wasn't Caleb. It wasn't Henry. And it wasn't some faceless stranger in the woods. It was someone who had always stayed just outside the spotlight, always offering advice, always claiming to help. The man who had pushed him to turn the camera over to the sheriff's office. The one who told him to keep asking questions, but only the right ones. Mr. Leland, the college prep counselor. Marcus had known him for 2 years. Leland had helped him with scholarship applications, wrote him recommendation letters, even offered rides home when it rained. He was the one who encouraged Marcus to volunteer, to give up his seat on the bus that day. And now Marcus realized he hadn't been guiding him. He'd been grooming him. With his heart pounding, Marcus called Sheriff Perez, but stopped mid-dial. If she was dirty too, if she really had known about all this, then calling her might just tip them off. Instead, he went to the only person who had never asked for anything in return, Frank, the old truffle hunter. Frank didn't hesitate. He gave Marcus an old pair of boots, a flashlight, and a burner phone. If what you're saying is true, son, then you need to be real careful. Men like that who live double lives, they don't leave loose ends. Marcus nodded. I think I know where he's going. The cabin site, there's more there. He's trying to cover up something. That night, Marcus returned to the forest. The moon was bright enough to light the trail, but he stayed low, off the main path, careful not to leave any sound behind. When he reached the edge of the old cabin ruins, he saw it, a new set of tire tracks. And crouched by what remained of the burned foundation, digging with gloved hands, was Mr. Leland. Marcus pulled out his phone and hit record. Leland didn't hear him at first. He was too focused. His movements were frantic, like he was searching for something buried beneath the ass. Then he paused, stood slowly, and turned. Their eyes met. Leland froze. His face went slack, then shifted into something darker. "You shouldn't be here, Marcus," he said calmly, like he was giving detention. "This isn't your story." "Yes, it is," Marcus replied. "You made it mine the moment you handed me that note." Leland took a slow step forward. "She told me you were smart." She was right. But she didn't understand what this was about. None of you do. Emily thought she could walk away. She thought the truth would protect her. "You killed her," Marcus said, his voice shaking but steady. "You followed her. She tried to run, but you wouldn't let her." Leland shook his head.
No.
"She made choices. Dangerous ones. I just redirected the story. Kept it clean." Suddenly, headlights flared behind them. Sheriff Perez's cruiser rolled up the trail, engine rumbling. She stepped out slowly, hand near her weapon. Leland didn't flinch. "Of course you'd come," he said to her. "I kept your name clear. You owed me." Perez didn't respond. Her eyes flicked to Marcus. "He called me,
Told me everything.
I didn't believe it at first, but then I heard the audio." Marcus stared at her. "So, you're not with him?" She shook her head.
No.
"But I did know things I didn't act on. That's on me. I thought if I ignored the pieces, the puzzle would stay broken." Leland turned to run, but Perez was faster. A single warning shot into the air froze him in place. Within minutes, backup arrived. Leland was handcuffed and loaded into a squad car, his silence chilling. He never looked at Marcus again. As dawn broke over the valley, Marcus sat on the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, the tension finally beginning to release. Henry arrived not long after. He looked weary but relieved. "I saw the footage," he said. "I didn't know. I really didn't." Marcus nodded. "I believe you." Perez approached with an evidence bag. Inside it was the tin box Marcus had seen in the ashes. "We recovered this before Leland could destroy it completely." Inside were the originals, Emily's final journal entries, some of the letters, and a photo. She handed the photo to Marcus. It was a picture of Emily standing in front of her school, laughing, carefree, eyes full of hope. Behind her, slightly out of focus but unmistakably watching, was Leland. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. She knew. She knew it was him all along. Perez nodded. "And she tried to tell us." The story was over. Almost. That evening, Marcus returned home for the first time in days. He dropped his backpack on the floor and pulled out the note, the one the pregnant woman on the bus had handed him. He hadn't looked at it in a while. But now, under the light of his desk lamp, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. There was a second fold in the paper. He opened it. Another line was written, this one in smaller handwriting. "Sometimes the person who saves you isn't the one you expect." Marcus stared at the words, heart pounding again. Because underneath that line was a name. Caleb Wright. And suddenly, everything shifted again. What if Caleb hadn't been the villain? What if he had been watching Emily to protect her? What if the woman on the bus wasn't just connecting Marcus to Emily's past, but to a man still hiding in the shadows? And what if Caleb was still out there, waiting for his name to be cleared? Marcus sat back, staring out the window, wondering if the story he thought had ended had only just begun. The morning after everything unraveled, Napa Valley looked peaceful, like it had nothing to do with the storm that had just passed through its quiet hills. But for Marcus, nothing felt the same anymore. The truth was out. Mr. Leland had been behind Emily's disappearance, hiding in plain sight for 2 long years. Sheriff Perez, though not directly involved, had failed to act on signs that something was off. And now, as Marcus sat at the edge of the school courtyard, watching the world go on like normal, he couldn't stop thinking about one last name. Caleb Wright. It had been easy to blame him. The rumors from school, his sudden disappearance, the fact that he had once been close to Emily. Everyone had assumed the worst. But after everything that came to light, Leland's secret control over the investigation, the staged evidence, and now that second line in the note, the pieces didn't quite fit like they used to. Marcus met with Sheriff Perez one final time. She looked worn down, no longer carrying the heavy edge of authority, but something more honest, regret. "You were right about the woman on the bus," she told him. "We finally traced her name. Julia Monroe. She used to be a teacher at a different school. One of Leland's former colleagues. She left her job after a quiet settlement, claimed harassment, emotional manipulation. But the district covered it up. We think she'd been tracking him for years. Marcus nodded slowly. And Caleb? Perez hesitated, then slid a small folder across the table. We pulled new logs from a secure server Julia left us access to. Turns out, Caleb had been emailing Emily. He warned her, told her he suspected Leland was dangerous, that she should stay away from him. When she disappeared, Caleb panicked. He thought if he came forward, no one would believe him. So, he vanished. Where is he now? We think he's living under a different name in Oregon. The last IP address pinged from a public library up there a few weeks ago. But we've got no reason to charge him. He didn't run because he was guilty. He ran because he was scared. Marcus sat back in his chair, letting it sink in. The person the town once feared might have been the only one trying to do the right thing. The person who was supposed to guide students had been the one hiding the darkest secrets. Later that day, Marcus returned to the trail where it all began. The site where Emily had gone missing had been cleared, the crime scene tape taken down, the dirt smoothed over. But something about the place still felt sacred, like it held pieces of her story in the trees and wind. He placed a small bouquet of wildflowers near the bench where she used to stop during her jogs, a quiet tribute to a woman he'd never met but now felt deeply connected to. The community began to heal slowly. Emily's parents finally received confirmation of what happened, and though it was painful, it gave them something they hadn't had in years: closure. A proper memorial was held in the school auditorium where she used to teach. Her students, some now grown, came to share memories and hang her artwork in a display that would stay up permanently. A corner of the school garden was named in her honor. Frank the Truffle hunter went back to his quiet morning walks, this time without the weight of a terrible discovery hanging over his head. His pig Daisy got more attention than ever. Local kids even came out just to take pictures with the animal who had helped crack a case that no one else could. And Henry, though shaken by the truth, stayed in Napa. He helped clean up the cabin site and donated Emily's journals and camera to a local nonprofit focused on women's safety. He and Marcus stayed in touch, their bond now rooted not just in pain, but in the shared determination to remember Emily the right way. Marcus went on to finish high school with honors. He used the story, not just as a memory, but as a mission. He applied to colleges with a focus on criminal psychology and journalism, determined to uncover other stories like Emily's that had been overlooked or buried. The note he'd received from Julia Monroe, the one that started it all, remained tucked in his wallet like a compass, always reminding him that doing the right thing often starts with something simple, like giving up a seat. In his college entrance essay, he wrote, "I didn't set out to solve anything. I was just trying to be kind. But sometimes, kindness opens the door to something much bigger. I learned that truth doesn't always shout, it waits. And when someone listens, really listens, it finally speaks." The case became a local legend, taught in journalism classes, discussed in true crime podcasts, even featured briefly on a documentary series. But to Marcus, it was never just a story.
It was about Emily.
About people like Julia and Caleb, those who tried to help but weren't believed. And about the danger of trusting appearances over instincts. Even now, years later, Marcus sometimes thinks back to that day on the bus. The pregnant woman, the folded note, the strange spark of connection he hadn't understood at the time. It all made sense now. Julia had seen something in him, a willingness to act without expecting anything in return. And that's what gave him the strength to keep going, even when the truth became hard to carry. In the end, the story of the woman who vanished on a morning jog in Napa and the teen who gave up his seat on a crowded bus came full circle, not because of one dramatic twist, but because of many quiet moments that added up to something much bigger. And maybe that's how most real stories work. Not with a perfect ending, but with people choosing to listen, to care, and to tell the truth, even when it hurts.